The CDC is recommending that all people over 6 months of age get another COVID vaccine, this time as a booster. Now, only 16% of Americans have done this. Yet there's now research out of Europe showing that not only does a fourth dose, as in another booster of COVID, not reduce the chances of dying from COVID, but it's actually increasing the frequency of infections a few months after taking that booster shot. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So in my forever and never-ending desire to give you all of the information as I see it, there is a new research study out of Austria that is really providing some detailed information that we haven't had before. Now, of course, when we started off with COVID and the vaccines were first put forth, there was 2 doses of messenger RNA or one of the non-messenger RNA vaccine that was considered having a person up to date. Then there was a third dose and another booster dose, and now up to 4 doses, and some people have actually gotten more if they were in high risk. But this new research out of Austria in particular really got my attention because now that so many people have had COVID or a vaccine, over 97% of people have immunity, as we've talked about. So is this the same disease that we were dealing with 3 years ago? Of course it's not. Do we have the same immunity that we had 3 years ago? Of course not. And all of that should be taken into account when a person's making the best health decision for themselves or their family as to how to proceed with additional doses of the vaccine. Okay, now in particular, I'm referring to this study. It's out of Austria, and it's actually put together by the Austria Agency for Health and Food Safety. This is a major division within their health department of their government, okay? It was also compiled by 3 of their major medical schools in Austria, and it's called Effectiveness of a Fourth SARS-CoV-2 Vaccine Dose in Previously Infected Individuals from Austria. So, a few things to unpack there. First of all, to be clear, this is only people of Austria. People of Austria tend to have similar genetics. This may not be so for people who are not sharing the same genetics. So this may not be for people who are in Africa or who come from a Hispanic background or others as well. So, Asians. So again, we always should take things into account as this is the data that's presented to us, and this should not be taken as conclusive data and the only thing to make our decisions on. Okay. Now, what they did here is they noted that their evidence is very limited in the first place, in terms of the study that's been done as to whether a 4th dose compared to a 3rd dose or second or none really is making a difference at this point. Okay. And in addition to that, what this is also looking specifically in people who have previously been infected. Now, there is research that have shown that when a person has never been infected before, that continuing to get boosters does provide more immunization to them because they haven't had the hybrid immunity, all of those additional proteins besides spike protein that are naturally found on the SARS-CoV-2 virus that also people can develop immunity for, and that's different when they just get the vaccine. So there is research that does show that if you keep on getting vaccinated, that you will have at least temporary, some people say 3 months, 5 months, 7 months, depending on the study, but that there is protection. But that's not what we're talking here. And this is the first time that this has looked specifically at people who have already had COVID at least once. Okay? Now, and what their primary goal was to see, does the 4th shot provide any additional benefit compared to the 3rd shot? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about fewer doses or none as well, but that was the primary goal of this study. Okay. Now, as I said, now in the previous research that does show that 4 doses provide more than benefit than the 3rd doses. It also needs to be noted that the biggest benefit has been seen in people who are in nursing homes, which traditionally means elderly people. People who don't live outside of their nursing homes. So they typically have high-risk issues, medical issues. And of course, there's going to be some level of bias to that because, of course, that's the same highest risk population from dying from COVID or getting super sick from COVID. So we also should take that into account. But in this particular study, there were almost 4 million subjects, 4 million people. Now, Austria has a total population of 9 million, which means that 44% of their entire country was part of this study, was part of this research. Now, also, one of the things about Austria is that they have done more testing for COVID than any other country on the planet. So, some people say, well, is that going to catch things that people may not have? Yeah, it may, but it also means that they have the most data, and you can only see data for what it's worth. Okay. But the fact that 44% of the population was part of this, that's huge. That would be akin to 100 million to 150 million Americans being part of a study, which is, again, tremendously big. Okay. Now, in this study, 97% of people had received the messenger RNA vaccine. Okay. Now, of them, 7.1% of them had 4 doses of the vaccine. 39% had 3 doses. 2.5% had 2 doses, or 1 to 2 doses, I should say, and 30% had never been vaccinated at all. So there is a lot of splay there in terms of the different populations. Now, a bit about this. In Austria, it is also, besides the fact that they test the most, their National Vaccine Committee is recommending a 4th dose for all people 12 and over. Different than here where we say 6 months and over. You can do that what you want. But just again, a little bit different because they're talking specifically about people who are 12 months and older. 12 years old and older. Okay. And what they did is they were counting the total number of vaccines given by the end of October 2022. And then looked to see, and then they started collecting for 2 months the data starting the beginning of November 2022 to the end of the year. Okay. Now, what they found is that, first of all, they did not see an observed difference in terms of COVID deaths in 3 versus 4, okay? They did find, however, that after a few months, 3 months, where there was a temporary, they're using the term transient increased protection from getting a 4th dose in terms of getting sick from COVID in the first place, after those 3 months, people were more likely to get sick if they had 4 doses compared to 3 or 2 for that matter. Now, they actually did show. Now there were only 6. Every life is important, but 69 people died during that 2-month period. Okay, when you broke it up to those who got the 4th dose versus those who got the 3rd dose, there was actually 24% less death in the population that had 3 doses versus 4. But we're not going to be able to call that means that it's more dangerous to get the 4th dose. That's not what this means, because there were not enough subjects, there were not enough deaths in the group to call it a statistically significant finding, right? There needs to be enough numbers to give the power to the study to call it that it's not just due to chance. So what they're saying is with the number of people who actually had passed away, that was not enough in both groups to say that this couldn't have been just to chance. Okay. Now, what they also found is, so again, but they did show that people were more likely to actually die, just again, not significant. But again, the deaths overall were low. And so just to give you those numbers, there were 31 deaths in the people who got 4 doses. There were 20 deaths in the people who got 3 doses, 7 in the 1 to 2, and 11 in the none. But again, you have to take into account those numbers that we were talking about before. But let's face it, there were 11 people who died in the people who got 1.2 million who never had a vaccine. Yet there were 31 out of the 287,000 who had 4 doses. So again, those are kind of important numbers there, okay? Now, they also do point out, which I think is important, is that the older a person is, the more likely they got a 4th dose. So again, coming back to that age bias from before. So if the people who are most at risk of dying from COVID were the people who got the 4th dose, there is also the possibility why this is not completely interpretable that it's killing people, because it's not. Very clear. It's not like more people are dying. But also, if the people who were taking the 4th dose were the ones most likely to die from COVID, then it also leads to assume that, vaccine aside, that could have been part of what was going on here. Okay, now, in terms of symptomatic infection of people relative to the number of vaccines, okay, so as I said, for the first 3 months, the 4th dose did provide protection. After that, it was less likely to provide protection, and that was statistically significant. People were more likely to catch symptomatic COVID after 4 doses compared to after 3 doses. Okay? Now, now there are other studies in America, Singapore, Italy, that have shown that a 4th dose does provide protection compared to 3 doses. However, none of those studies look past the 2 months. And that's the big difference. We referred to a topic called relative vaccine effectiveness. So compared to not doing it or compared to something else, what's the relative chance? Okay. And what they showed is, again, there was a clear decline in the effectiveness after 3 months. And again, more likely, therefore, to get infected after 4 months. So what's the conclusion here? Well, the groups with 4 doses did have significantly less infection after a few months. So I guess you could say that if you had a very important trip or a family wedding or something like that, and you wanted to make sure that you weren't going to be sick for that particular event, that particular travel, would getting an extra dose of COVID vaccine provide you protection against that for that very short time period? Yeah, it would. In fact, we actually did that for 1 dose because we were all taking a family cruise a couple years ago when we were first coming back with it. Now I think that things have changed. Okay. Now, this is what the authors themselves have concluded. I'm going to read this. In general, our study results question whether recommendations for repeated vaccine boosters against SARS-CoV-2 are currently justified for large parts of the general population with a history of previous infections. And again, this is coming from organizations similar to theirs, to our CDC over there out of Austria. So again, one more piece of information. We'll see if there's more research that comes out after this, but there's now data that's kind of not supporting what our CDC's recommendations are, or for that matter, the equivalent in Austria. Have a nice day.